Hello, this is the first lecture for Topic 9, Chapter 6 on public opinion, and in this lecture we're going to be defining public opinion. So what are we going to be covering in this lecture? Well, first we're going to define public opinion. Next we're going to talk about how public opinion is not formed in a vacuum, but that the opinion that you hold is a reflection of political values, and the political values are what shape public opinion. Next, we're going to learn about how we learn our political values, and that's what's known as political socialization. And we'll do a quick overview of the different agents of political socialization. And then there's an extra credit opportunity that we'll talk about where you can earn up to 10 extra credit points. So let's get started. So what is public opinion? Well, your textbook defines public opinion as the attitudes people have about issues, events, and personalities. And people can have public opinions about a lot of different issues, events, and personalities. But since this is a class in political science, we're interested in the public opinion that people have about political issues, political events, and political personalities. So, for example, a public opinion that a person might have about a political issue might be their attitude towards immigration law or their attitude towards abortion and abortion regulations. If I were to ask you about public opinion of a political event, I might ask you what's your attitude towards the Black Lives Matters protests. And if I were to ask you about your public opinion on political personality, you would be telling me about the attitudes that you would have about Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, President Donald Trump, or any other political personality. So an example of a specific example of public opinion is if I were to ask you what your attitude regarding same-sex marriage is and how you would respond to that. Do you think that gays and lesbians should be able to be legally married the same as straight people? Do you think that the right to get married is a constitutionally protected right? Or do you think that this isn't a constitutionally protected right, but that the right should be determined by legislation at the state level? And so your answer to those questions expresses your attitude towards a political issue, that political issue being same-sex marriage. So the attitudes you have about political issues, events, and personalities aren't formed in a vacuum. The attitudes that you hold are a reflection of your values. And so values shape the attitudes and your public opinion. They shape all of our attitudes and public opinions. And there are some core values that underpin the United States democracy. Your textbook talks about how there is general support for what's known as the core values of liberty, democracy, and equality. And we talked about this earlier this semester. We talked about one way of defining what it means to be an American is to embrace the American creed, and that the American creed is belief that that we all have these personal freedoms, that the government should be sort of prohibited from interfering with, that we should make decisions with the will of the people in mind, and that what the majority wants generally is what drives our decision making, and that humans are born with these fundamental natural rights, that we are born equally and that we should be treated equally in the eyes of the law. And so in the United States, there's strong support for these three core values. They make up the foundation of our political culture. And so when we talk about attitudes being shaped by values, that we see that the public opinion that people hold on, in this case, same-sex marriage or any other political issue, is oftentimes a reflection of those core values, even if the opinions differ. And so that your attitude on same-sex marriage is shaped by your understanding of liberty. Your attitude towards same-sex marriage is shaped by your attitude and your embracing and your understanding of democracy and equality as well. And so let's look at how different opinions on a particular political subject can be motivated by similar support for these three core values. So when we think about liberty, we usually think about liberty as being defined as that a person is free to make choices and decisions with limited interference from government. So, how could somebody be in favor of same sex marriage, but how could somebody be opposed to same sex marriage, but that their support or their lack of support for same sex marriage could be motivated by the way that they value liberty? Well, some people maybe who are in support of same sex marriage would say that they're in support of same sex marriage because they really value freedom and liberty. That people should be free to marry who you choose to marry, that people can love and marry whoever they want, and that government shouldn't interfere with your choice of who you want to marry. And not only that, that the government should create conditions in order to support this freedom of choice. And so a person could say, hey, I'm in favor of same-sex marriage because of liberty. But on the flip side of that, you could say that you oppose same-sex marriage, but you oppose it for liberty reasons. And those liberty reasons could be that you're free to exercise your religious beliefs, you're free to hold your religious beliefs, and that you really don't think that government should interfere with that free exercise of religious beliefs. And so that if you do not want to support same sex marriage, if you want to, like we talked about this earlier in the semester, you want to not bake cakes or make floral arrangements or serve or cater a same sex wedding, that you should be free to do that because that your opposition to supporting same-sex marriage is because that you want freedom to exercise your religious beliefs. So, differing opinions, same core value. What about equality in same-sex marriage? Well, equality, this idea that we are born equally and that we should be treated equally in the eyes of the law. On the one hand, you could say you support same-sex marriage because you feel like people who are lesbian, gay, bi, trans, queer, that they should have equal rights, and that they should be treated the same as all other classes of people, and so that gay folks should be treated the same as straight folks, and that discriminating when it comes to marriage or when it comes to adoption, that there's no justified reason for treating those folks differently. Well, on the flip side of that, you could say that you are opposed to same-sex marriage, but that you oppose it on equality grounds. And what do I mean by that? Well, you could see somebody say that they do support equality, but there are times when you treat people differently, and that different treatment is justified. And so you could see that people would say that they would think they could argue that treating gays and lesbians different when it came to marriage and adoption is justified because gay marriages, same-sex partnerships, having a same-sex couple adopt a child is fundamentally different than a heterosexual couple adopting a child. That there might be concerns that in terms of the children being bullied, or in terms of that same-sex couples cannot procreate, and maybe the reason for marriage is regulation of procreation and support for not just a couple but a family. And so you could say that you oppose same-sex marriage because that you think that there are times that different treatment is in fact justified, and the government is well within the right of doing that. And then finally, you could say that you either support or don't support same-sex marriage because of your embracing of democracy. And so on the one side, you could say, you know what, the majority should decide whether or not same-sex marriage should be legal. That democracy is about majority rules, and if the majority of people want it, then it should be legal. But if the majority of people stand opposed to it, then it shouldn't be legal. And so that where you stand on same-sex marriage could be a reflection of what the will of the people want. And you could even go farther and say that that should be a decision that should be left to the states. So it's sort of like democracy, but that democracy should be in the hands of the local units rather than at the national level. On the flip side of that, you could you could be a supporter of same-sex marriage and say that, yeah, decisions are made by the majority, but in a democracy, minorities groups deserve protection as well. And it's up to the Supreme Court, and in some cases the Congress, in order to step in and protect the rights of minorities, so that we define democracy as majority rules, but also making sure that the rights of minority groups are protected. So this is just a way that shows that you can have values such as liberty, equality, and democracy that shape the opinion that you have on this issue of same-sex marriage, but that how those values influence your opinion differs in determining in relationship to how you define liberty, equality, and democracy. So coming out of the 2020 election, just barely, one of the things you hear a lot in the news is just how divided we are as a nation. That even though Joe Biden won the election, that it was a very close election, and that nearly half of the nation voted for Joe Biden, and the other half voted for Donald Trump. It was very close, and so there's been a lot of conversation about how do we bridge the divide, how do we come together as a nation to solve big problems. And the reason, what I think that a lot of us are looking for ways to have civil discussions with people that we really disagree with, right? And this discussion about trying to find common values, um, that you can have an opinion about something because you really hold liberty near and dear. You have an opinion about something and you really hold democracy near and dear, or equality near and dear. Sometimes it helps to foster civil discussions if you're able to identify that common ground, or to be more specific, you're able to identify that common value that both people hold, even though your opinions are profoundly different. So the next time you're having a heated discussion with somebody, whether that's heated discussion on abortion or heated discussion on climate change or immigration, see if you share a common love for one of the values that we talked about: liberty, democracy, or equality. And then, if in the course of your conversation, your heated conversation, you kind of take a step back and say, wow, the one thing that we both really value is the idea of liberty, that people should be free to make the choices that they want to make. But that it's the way we think about liberty that actually results in these very different opinions. But what we do have in common is our love of liberty, or our support for equality, or support for democracy. Okay, and so if you're able to hone in and find that common value that you share, it at least can bring down the temperatures and allow you to engage in a heated discussion about a heated issue in a more civil manner. Okay, so far we've talked about political opinion, which is the attitudes that we have about events, issues, and personalities in the political realm. And then we've talked about how values shape our attitudes. The next thing we're going to talk about is where these values that shape our attitudes come from. And just as attitudes aren't formed in a vacuum, they're a reflection of our values. The values that we have are not formed in a vacuum either. In other words, the political values that we hold are not innate. We're not born with them, but we learn these political values. And when we live, if you ever have the opportunity, or have had the opportunity to travel abroad, you can really see that the political values that different cultures hold near and dear can be quite divergent. And that it's not that if you live in an Asian country like Japan, that puts a lot of emphasis on the group and less emphasis on the individual, where in the United States we put a lot of emphasis on the value of individuality and individual autonomy. You know, Japanese folks aren't born putting the group or the community first. Americans aren't born putting the individual first. We learn that. And the way we learn that is through the process of what's known as political socialization. And so, political socialization is the process through which underlying political beliefs and values are formed. That these values are transmitted to us by certain entities and agents. And so your textbook talks about that this political socialization takes place through these agents of socialization. Okay, so we have certain entities, groups that really shape and help us learn what these values that we hold. And so we're not going to talk about all of these, but we'll talk about them briefly, just to kind of give you a nice overview of the different agents of political socialization. And then you're going to get an extra credit opportunity to tell me about the impact that agents of political socialization have had on your life. So your textbook talks about the role that families have on shaping our political beliefs and values. Talks about the role that peers, friends, and involvement in social networks has on socializing us politically. Membership in social groups such as gender, race, ethnicity, religion has a huge and profound impact on our political socialization. Education, how much or how little education you have shapes our political beliefs and values, and also the political circumstances and experiences that you have. Sometimes I ask students to think about what their first political memory is. And if your first political memory is like, the Allied countries liberating people from concentration camps during World War II. Your political values and beliefs are going to be really profoundly different than if your first political memory is, for me, it was the impeachment or the resignation of the President of the United States, President Nixon, or if your first political memory, for probably a lot of you, is 9/11, right? Those memories and those experiences that we have can have a huge socializing effect on us as well. So let's just take a moment to take a look at family, friends, social networks, and memberships in social groups and talk a little bit about how those shape us. One of the biggest agents of political socialization is the family. And that should not come as a surprise. When we're young, we're impressionable. Our parents and our families are almost our total lives, particularly in the early years. So it should come as no surprise that any political message that we receive from our families can greatly shape the attitudes and the values that we have, particularly if those political messages that we got are coherent and consistent. And so just, ask yourself, just little things that don't seem obvious in terms of the political socialization as a child by your family can have a profound impact on you. So think, growing up, did you eat, if you ate dinner together with your family, did you guys talk about politics around the table? Or was politics sort of a verboten subject, and did you talk sports and weather, but no politics allowed? If politics is allowed, that sends a communication, that sends a message to children. If it's not allowed, it also sends a message as well. Did your parents vote? Did they take you to go vote? Or did they not vote? Again, it's a message that is sent. And so, the socialization that takes place in families is quite significant. Parents serve as role models, and so if we see our parents being politically active in voting, we may follow suit as adults. If we feel comfortable talking about politics, that might lead us to be more knowledgeable on politics, and that your parents can role model that, and vice versa as well. The you That families shape your ideology, your party affiliation, and your religion. So if your parents were conservative, chances are you're conservative. Not it's the higher probability, but it's not a certainty. If your parents were Democrats, you're more likely to be a Democrat. And since religion really shapes our values, and those values can have an impact on our political beliefs, most kids are raised in the religion of their families or raised in no religion at all, and all of those have an impact on socialization. So yes, more likely to be conservative if parents are conservative, etc., but not always. And your textbook goes into much more detail, so make sure you read it. This is a relatively new agent of political socialization, but it's an agent of political socialization that had a profound effect on our political beliefs, and that's our social networks. And so it used to be that families would have the largest impact, and still do have a large impact on our political socialization. But peers are beginning to have an even a significant impact on people's political socialization, as are social networks, and in particular mediated social networks: Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. And so, we're social citizens, and our opinions can change due to social pressure, particularly if that social pressure is visible, and that visibility of social pressure, or at least social cues regarding political opinion through social networks like Facebook and Twitter, can have an impact on people's attitudes. And so they use the example in your textbook about how sometimes people will change their profile on Facebook to reflect a particular political cause or concern. And so, you can probably use examples, but the example that they used in the textbook was, the impact of the Me Too movement and changing your profile to pink, or those sorts of things. And so, they talk about how changing your profile to reflect or support an issue can impact the opinions of others. So maybe ask yourself, have you ever learned about an issue, a political issue, because of the interaction that you've had with folks on your social network? How have social networks and your peers shaped your political beliefs and values? Has your opinion on a social or political issue ever changed due to what you learned about on a social network? And if so, how? And then finally, just kind of thinking critically is when you think about the impact of political socialization that comes through social networks, is that beneficial or detrimental to democracy? It could definitely be beneficial, because if you don't know about an issue and then somebody in your social network teaches you about an issue, that leads you to have more information, and then it can shape your opinion one way or the other. On the flip side of that, if the way that you are being shaped in terms of your attitude towards a political issue, if that's based on misinformation or falsehoods, that could definitely have a detrimental effect on democracy. Another important agent of political socialization is social groups. And so membership in social groups can have a profound impact on our political values. We talked about this when we were talking about the agency, or the sociological theory of representation, when we were on our section on Congress. But social groups, your gender, your race, your ethnicity, your religion, have and greatly can shape your opinion on particular political issues. And that's because if people of the same background tend to have similar lived experiences, then it's possible those experiences will shape their understanding of the political world. So I'll leave it to you to read in the textbook about this thing called the gender gap, how the opinions of women on political issues can be profoundly different than the opinions that men hold. And also, your textbook spends a lot of time looking at the gap between the opinions of African American folks and white folks in the United States, indicating that the lived experiences of those groups, has a profound impact on how they evaluate the political world. And so here's your extra credit opportunity. Now, if we were in the classroom together, I would be saying, okay, everybody, take out a blank piece of paper and a pencil or pen, and I want you to take some time to write. And then you would turn it in. And I always love this assignment, because students take it really seriously, and I always learn a lot from my students about what have been the most important agents of political socialization on their life. And so I didn't want to miss out on this opportunity for us to do this, even though this is a remote learning moment. So what I want you to do is this is a brief writing assignment. And so what I want you to do is I want you to thinking of the different agents of political socialization, whether it's family, peers, social networks, political experience, membership in a social group, all the different agents that they talk about in your textbook. I want you to identify 2 agents of political socialization that have been most significant in shaping your political beliefs and values. Now, I don't pick pick agents from the same category. So don't say my first agent is my mom and my second agent is my grandpa, or something like that. Okay, don't do that. It's got to be an agent from a different category of agents of political socialization. Then after you select your 2, start with your first one and then describe to me specifically how this agent has shaped or impacted your political beliefs and values, and then do the same for the second one. Okay, and then I want you to submit this to assignments. The assignment is already up and it's ready for you to just submit it as a Word document. And there's a due date posted, and that by doing this you can earn up to 10 extra credit points. Okay, I look forward to reading those, and thanks for listening.